I'm Jan De Silva, President and CEO of Toronto Region Board of Trade. Delighted to welcome you here from Toronto, Canada's commercial centre, and the centre of the world in terms of AI startups, where we have more AI startups than any other location jurisdictionally. A lot of that is due to our supportive AI ecosystem here in Toronto, with players like Mars Discovery District, Venture Lab, and Durham's AI Hub convening resources, and more than 11 universities and colleges reinforcing our AI research and talent pipelines. AI is primed to scale up significantly here and around the world, moving from smart devices and chatbots into every sector. Already, AI is being used to transform entertainment, healthcare, and security, but nowhere will AI have a bigger impact than on transportation. As the population of all our global cities continues to grow and the demand for e-commerce and door-to-door service matches it, AI has the potential to better order and coordinate all that movement. Without it, we'll continue to face high emissions, lower productivity, and gridlock, something our region deals with as one of North America's worst places to commute, a reputation we hold with much less pride than our AI credentials. The marriage of AI and transportation is promising, but not inevitable, as you'll hear from our panelists in a few moments. We must set up our global cities as environments for this kind of innovation when it comes to regulations, investment, public trust, talent, and planning for how we'll best deploy it. In this panel, we'll touch on these themes and more, and I'm joined here by two of our region's brightest minds in AI and transportation. With me today is Igor Gilitschenski, an assistant professor in computer science at the University of Toronto. Prior to that, Igor was at MIT, where he was part of their computer science and artificial intelligence lab. As we talk about autonomous vehicles, there's no one better to have on side. Also with us is Baher Abdulhai, Director of the Toronto Intelligent Transportation Systems Centre, as well as a professor at the University of Toronto. The centre works with operations across Canada and Ontario, exploring how AI could interface with our traffic systems to improve overall performance. My warmest welcomes to both you, Baher and Igor.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start with a broader question that introduces the idea of AI to our audience. Baher, perhaps we'll start with you. What does it mean for computers to learn, and what applications does that have for both your research areas? Let's start with you, Baher, and then over to you, Igor.
Well, an example that is easy to relate to, a child or a toddler learns how to walk without a teacher. They just get up and take a couple of steps, fall to the right, fall to the left, and a few bumps later they are above the fridge, under the bed, and if you can only catch them. So can we make a traffic light learn the same way? If we put on a traffic light, for instance, eyes to see, like cameras and LiDAR sensors, and then as they see approaching traffic, they learn how to time themselves precisely in accordance to the approaching traffic, so to avoid wasting time. I'm sure as drivers, all of us have seen traffic lights burn green. We teach them, or we make them learn not to do that. Gonna be on their tippy toes, agile and efficient with time.
Excellent. I can't wait for that to happen. I can't tell you how often I'm sitting at a red light and there's no one going through the green.
We're working on it.
Igor?
Another type of learning that we are also using a lot in robotics is actually based on seeing many examples. And this seeing many examples, it's actually not only used in robotics, it's also used beyond. Examples can be examples of objects that were recorded from a camera, and examples of some classifications of speech. And based on these examples, similar to the inspiration that we get from a teacher who shows us how to do something a few times and then we try to mimic it, in a similar way, very, very loosely spoken, a neural network that is now a very common way of doing AI is learning to predict, for example, what objects are on the road, or what type of image am I seeing. And these types of predictions are then used for further processing in robotic decision making.
Yeah. And it's a very complex element because you've got distracted pedestrians and drivers and humans that it's very hard to predict where they're going to be going.
Yes, that's actually one of the biggest challenges, anticipating behaviors and anticipating very rare cases is one of the things that will probably make us problems for years to come.
As I said off the top, self-driving and autonomous vehicles could offer one of the most momentous transformations in urban life. Igor, what will these transformations look like and what roadblocks are we hitting to get there?
I think some of the transformations we cannot even imagine, in the same way as we couldn't anticipate all the transformations that will be possible once the phone became a smartphone. But one thing that is relatively certain is that by not having to drive, once we reach that point, not having to steer the vehicle, we will have several effects. One effect is that we will have more time that we can spend in the car doing other things. And this time might make it for us more likely to spend time in the car. But also the other effect is that the car won't need us. It won't even need to be located in the same spaces where we live. So this will free up potentially a lot of parking spaces for urban development. The roadblocks are pretty big, and I briefly mentioned some of them, but I think ultimately the biggest roadblock that we face in autonomous driving and in enabling autonomous driving is that we don't build infrastructure from scratch. We have to introduce this type of transportation system in an environment where there are other road users and other human road users. And anticipating their behavior, as I said, is in most cases simple, but there are so many cases that are out of the ordinary, and handling these out of the ordinary cases is a big challenge.
Self-driving cars, Baher, we were talking about this before we came on stage. I mean, it has the potential to be a huge solution to our movement woes, but it could also be a challenge if it's not planned right. And smarter traffic management is a critical element of this. How does the implementation horizon of AI traffic management compare to autonomous vehicles? Are we facing challenges that differ from broader AI obstacles? And can you also circle back on how do we best deploy this so it's not creating more chaos on the road?
Yeah, interestingly, you used the word transformation. So AVs, will definitely be very transformative. But transformation is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. It can be very positive, but it could be very negative on the other hand. So an example of how it would be very positive if AVs are smart enough to drive in tight formations with small headway and higher speed, then road capacities would increase double or triple without having to build any more infrastructure. So this is a boost that we can all make use of. But on the other hand, if an AV, for instance, is very cautious, if you have adaptive cruise control in your car and you see how much space it leaves in front of it just to make you comfortable and be on the cautious side, then that reduces road capacity. So if the AV is superhuman, then it's very beneficial. If it is very cautious and subhuman, then it could be detrimental. So that's from the driving task perspective. Now, from the city perspective, if AVs are used in a useful way, for instance, complement public transit, GO Transit and subway lines and so on, then it would be very, very helpful because they serve a need and a gap in the infrastructure furnishing the first mile and last mile leg of a trip. But again, on the negative side, if we become very dependent on cars, you take the pain of driving away. I'm not like holding my steering wheel anymore and watching a movie or answering my emails and so on. That means I can be in the car for longer. So that potentially can create longer commutes, can potentially feed urban sprawl, which are side effects that we do not want. So that transformation, as I said, is like a double-edged sword. It depends what we do with the technology. Now, in terms of making the car smart, that's obviously necessary, but it's not sufficient because we have to make the infrastructure also smart. For example, like a smart car is aware of its immediate environment, like other cars that it doesn't want to crash into and so on. but it doesn't know that there's congestion ahead or there is a merging traffic from an on-ramp ahead. The infrastructure can know that, so the infrastructure is equally smart, aware of the traffic seen all over the city, and can transmit this information to approaching AVs, then they become aware and slow down before feeding into congestion. You can actually use the AVs themselves to regulate traffic. If you have 2-3 AVs in 3 lanes, they can hold back if we wanted to and pace the traffic going into a certain area.
Yeah, so as you're saying, it's much more than just the vehicle. It's everything around that, and it's going to be quite a challenge to get all of that infrastructure built.
On that note, there is, like in research, vehicle-to-infrastructure communication and how both can collaborate. A traffic light can tell an approaching vehicle, I'm switching in 20 seconds. And an approaching vehicle can tell the traffic light, I and many around me are coming your way, so give us green as soon as you can. So this collaboration can be synergetic.
Well, another challenge that we're facing now, coming through the pandemic, is e-commerce. We've accelerated the adoption of e-commerce across our cities, and as I said in my opening remarks, one of our titles that we don't bear too proudly is that we're one of the worst commuting destinations in North America. So with e-commerce distributors around the region increasing more than 50% in volumes of activity versus pre-COVID, how can AI help us better move goods as well as people? And what are your thoughts in terms of not just the final delivery, but also the supply chains that need to feed those fulfillment centers that ultimately, and the product manufacturers? So Igor, should we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So the interesting thing about e-commerce is that e-commerce firms, particularly larger e-commerce firms, and also logistic firms, have been one of the early adopters of using not only AI, but they have been also very early of using information technology for optimizing all types of processes. That being said, particularly in my area of expertise in robotics, there is a huge potential that we will still see realized over the next couple of decades. And this potential lies in all aspects of commerce, not only in e-commerce, but even in things such as restocking of supermarkets that will be possible to automate due to deployment of robots that not only can navigate but also grasp and take objects and place them on shelves. So I'm looking more on the optimistic side in terms of what will happen in e-commerce, because in that space I think the companies are very aware of the potentials that they can achieve through realizing robotics projects and to realizing AI projects and deploying them into their supply chains. And in some areas the technology is not there yet, but I think we're on a good way, and I'm certain that this is an area where we will see a lot of development in the coming years.
Baher, your thoughts on this topic?
Well, like autonomous driving and AI will likely happen in goods movement before we see it in passenger traffic. So for the long haul goods movement, we can now have truck trains, one driver driving one truck with a train of trucks behind, which increases, saves time, saves labor, and also increases energy efficiency of the truck train. On the flip side, or on the other side, the short haul last mile deliveries, like if my car is autonomous and drops me off at work, it need not park for 8 hours until I finish work. It can be hopping around making deliveries for a while and possibly taking passengers and so on, and then come back. That would increase in efficiency of the system overall, and also save space for parking and so on.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess another element, we've had companies, some of our e-commerce companies going into to China to look at Taobao and some of the platforms there. And some of those companies have actually invested, like Alibaba, invested heavily in smart signaling systems in the cities to ensure a certain delivery time horizon. Any thoughts on how that could be a factor as well in terms of improving the efficiency of e-commerce?
Well, more efficient traffic lights help travelers, but also help goods movement. Like our own research at U of T has shown that in a simulated environment, not in the real world yet, that if we make traffic lights smart and agile, we can reduce waiting at the traffic lights by up to 40%, 50% on average, which is substantial improvement given that we don't build in any infrastructure in terms of widening lanes and so on. And we don't have space to widen anything really in busy cities, so we have to resort to intelligence to increase that efficiency of the existing infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Now, something we were talking about before as well was regulations. One of the biggest challenges to deploying some of these great innovations is that our regulations don't necessarily allow for it or haven't kept pace with what's required to enable these technologies. So how can governments better enable the scaling up of AI, especially as it pertains to transportation? Igor, should we start with you?
Yeah, of course, as a researcher, our standard response is we need more money for research. Yeah. But I don't want to constrain myself to that. I think one important thing will be, even though we are not building infrastructure from scratch, having funding for infrastructure will remain very important, because even if not built from scratch, switching to an organization of transportation that requires or makes heavily use, even though modest, but still changes to infrastructure. And finally, I think it is important for governments to install a policy framework that allows local decision makers to experiment with different modalities and with different technologies, and to allow to try out whether these technologies can be useful in enabling an efficient way of organizing transportation systems.
And Baher, you were speaking earlier about the information be possible with infrastructure around vehicles, those types of things, but that's going to require data sharing policies and things like that. Your thoughts on the topic of government regulations, and how do we help them keep pace with the potential or the promise of new technology?
Well, data sharing is, like many other things, is a double-edged sword, again, that can cut both ways. Imagine, for instance, a simple Google application and how you use it to route you from A to B going to an appointment. If it were not for sharing your position and speed and everybody else is sharing, there would be no Google traffic. So sharing is a very positive enabler, sharing information, that is. On the other hand, we are also all aware how much Google knows about us and where we go and how much we buy and so on. So there is this privacy invasive angle of information sharing. So the challenge is to enable information distribution and sharing, but to be careful about preventing abuse of information, resale of information, hacking, and all the way up to potentially terrorism and so on. That's on the data sharing note. On what governments can help with in general in the space of AI and intelligent transportation, I always say that between innovation and implementation, there is a death valley, like there is a gap. So we need a bridge to cross that gap. If you have something new and innovative, nobody wants to procure it because it hasn't been done before. So that's an oxymoron, like, yeah, it is an innovation by definition, it hasn't been done before. So governments here can play a major role in accelerating real-life testing of technology and showcasing for the world that we can adopt these technologies and can be very useful in terms of efficiency, but also can be done very safe. So building that bridge between innovation on one hand and implementation in the real world and learn by doing is a space where the government can shine.
Okay. And any thoughts, anything else we can do to build public confidence? Is it specific use cases that people can understand? I mean, it's interesting because I serve on, I represent Canada on APEX Business Advisory Council, and we talk all the time as a collection of economies about the difference in views in, say, North America about data and deploying some of these technologies versus Asia, where there tends to be more trust in local governments to just move ahead with great innovation. Any thoughts on what we can be doing in the context of North America to build more confidence in the public's opinion about data requirements to enable these?
To gain the trust of the public in general with innovation, I would say seeing is believing. like talking about one thing theoretically or like fiction, it's not the same as seeing something in front of you. So I'm aware, for instance, in Toronto here, they are experimenting with AV shuttles and so on, which I think can go a long way if the public can see it, can ride on it, and can see that this helps them in a direct way. Then their level of trust will increase substantially.
Igor, your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and there is an additional benefit to actually showcasing these technologies. It provides feedback, and it provides feedback in two ways. One way it provides feedback is the direct feedback that we get from people who see it and who say, oh, we imagined it in a different way, or we would like to have it in a certain way. And the other type of feedback that it provides is just the experience that we have from deploying technologies outside of the lab, because a lot of research problems we often encounter not just by doing something in the lab, but by taking a technology that we're developing and actually bringing it into the environment that where it will be operating. And by doing so, we often realize, oh wow, that's actually much harder than we thought. And that's to some extent a little bit what is happening with autonomous driving. We are now just realizing the entire scope of problems that we still have to solve. But on the other hand, it's still exciting because we also see the first applications and first deployments of this technology.
Yeah, and the pilots make so much sense because it's scary to think about manned and unmanned vehicles on the road trying to navigate the same lanes. That's all the time we have for this discussion. I want to thank Igor and Baher for your time and your insights today.
Thanks so
Lots of excitement about the potential and what's being developed here in Toronto and elsewhere in the AV and AI deployment around transportation systems as well. As you've said, Baher, so much potential if we figure out the implementation right and what is it we're trying to solve for. The excitement about what's happening with robotics and how that can really smooth out supply chains and e-commerce and even our grocery stores. I mean, there's so much ahead that's very exciting for us. So I'd like to thank Toronto Global, Destination Toronto, and all our citywide partners for helping represent our region on this international stage. Please enjoy the rest of the sessions, and we hope to host you all here in Toronto sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you.